Part 2. Verbal and Nonverbal Communication. Part 2 provides you with some skills that form the basis of effective communication, which will help you get the most from the topics in the rest of this audiobook. Chapter 5 describes how to hone your observational skills and build trust and rapport quickly. Chapter 6 looks at how you can alter the way in which you communicate to suit the preferences of listeners. Chapter 7 covers several essential aspects and models of language to help you influence and gain information quickly and effectively. Chapter 5. Building Relationships at Work. How to get people on your side. One of the principles for success is the ability to build and maintain good working relationships with colleagues, customers, and other stakeholders. In NLP, this is called rapport. It is fundamental to all communications and can be defined as a feeling of trust and cooperation between people. In order to be able to build rapport, it is important that we are aware of how other people are responding. In NLP, there is a concept called sensory acuity. In other words, using your senses to watch, listen to, and in some cases, feel the subtle, sometimes extremely subtle, nonverbal signals that people are automatically sending, influenced by how they think and feel, so that you can gain an understanding of how they are feeling and responding at any given moment. This sensory awareness is a prerequisite for rapport, and we will briefly cover it before moving on to rapport. Sensory acuity. Sensory acuity is the second of the principles for success, Chapter 3. It relates to taking feedback about how a conversation or communication is going, and can help you communicate even more effectively in the workplace. To illustrate this, we need to go back in time briefly. In the introduction, I mentioned that NLP was initially developed in the 1970s by John Grinder and Richard Bandler, modeling excellent communicators. One of these excellent communicators was the eminent doctor and hypnotherapist Milton Erickson. Erickson has such exquisite sensory acuity that, so the story goes, he was able to tell that a patient was going into a trance because he could see the pulse in their ankles slowing down. You may be wondering at this point, what has hypnosis got to do with business? Put simply, hypnotherapists are in the business of influencing via their nonverbal and verbal communication. In the workplace, everyone wants to influence other people, whether it be salespeople influencing customers to explain their needs so that they can better serve the customer and, hopefully, sell to them. Managers influencing staff to perform better. Staff influencing managers for a pay raise or promotion. Doctors influencing patients to take their medication. Teachers and trainers influencing students and course delegates to learn. If you can use your sensory acuity to assess how people are feeling at any given moment, that is, their state, as referred to in the communication model in Chapter 2, you are more likely to be able to proceed at the right speed and influence them, just as a hypnotherapist is better able to proceed at the right speed to induce a trance in a client who wants to stop smoking. Using some of the previous workplace examples, is the customer ready to make a decision to buy, or do they need more information? Have the course delegates understood, or do they need more explanation? Overall, sensory acuity helps you gain a greater understanding of how someone is feeling at any given moment, and hence helps you choose how and what to communicate. Some principles of sensory acuity. Almost every person uses their sensory acuity automatically. Most people will know if their spouse, friends, or close work colleagues are in a particularly good or bad mood simply by looking at them when they walk into the room, or from hearing them say hello. The way people do this is by comparing how someone appears now to how they normally do, or by recognizing certain subtle nonverbal signals the person is currently exhibiting and comparing this occasion with the previous times they displayed these signals. This is known in NLP as calibrating. What to pay attention to. Without necessarily realizing it, you will have been noticing some or all of the following nonverbal signals when recognizing how people you know are feeling. For example, breathing patterns, fast or slow, chest or abdomen. Pupil size, dilated or constricted. Eye focus, fullness of the lower lip. Skin color change, blushing for example. Clusters of gestures, such as hand movements, foot tapping, body posture. Voice tonality, volume, pitch, speed, intonation. Facial muscle and eye movements. You can use sensory acuity with people whom you do not know well. For example, when meeting a new supplier and casually chatting before the meeting starts, pay attention to the nonverbal signals when they talk about, for example, the holiday they liked, the frustration they felt in a traffic jam, and other examples that link to their feeling in a particular way. You will be able to use this to recognize if they are feeling these states later in the conversation. Caveats. It is important to realize that people are different from each other, and the signals that one person sends when feeling, for example, confused, may be the same as someone else feeling, for example, curious. Remember also that some people are more demonstrative than others, and be wary of labeling someone's responses purely by one aspect of their body language. Story 5.1. When teaching sensory acuity in training courses, I ask people, what does someone having folded arms mean? The typical reply is, they're defensive or angry. Though this may be the case, I point out that the person may be cold. They may be comfortable with her arms folded. She may have a stain on her shirt, or she may be perspiring more than usual and not want you to see it. Please use common sense here. If someone is shouting in an abusive way, the signs about how they are feeling are evident. In his best-selling book, What Every Body is Saying, the author and former FBI investigator Joe Navarro, whose job included identifying when people were lying, emphasizes that each person is different, and though there may be certain signs that strongly indicate how someone is feeling, he would look for patterns. For example, people demonstrating the same response in more than one situation. So, using the arm folding example in Story 5.1, if someone folded their arms and then displayed angry behavior, be wary of the next time they folded their arms. Tip 5.1. Though sensory acuity alone would rarely be sufficient to identify whether a client, interviewee, or colleague is not being truthful, using your sensory acuity could indicate when it might be useful to probe for more information. Applications of sensory acuity at work. Here are some examples of how you could use sensory acuity in the workplace. Sales. Identifying whether the client is ready to agree to buy or needs further information before deciding. Gaining credibility by being able to ask probing questions if the customer shows signs of uncertainty. Story 5.2. One of my new students, Peter, had a meeting with a Chief Executive Officer, CEO, and his Human Resources Director, HRD. The CEO was a very domineering character. At one point, he said to the HRD, "I know you're happy with the level of staff engagement, aren't you?" And she replied, "Yes." But Peter had seen her agree with statements made previously. That is, he had calibrated her yes signals, and this was not a true yes. After the CEO left, Peter asked her about his question. Initially, she was taken aback that he had spotted it, but she then confided that she was having difficulties with the CEO and the area of staff engagement. Peter was able to work with her to begin to address this. Other examples of how you could use sensory acuity in the workplace. Appraisals. Is the member of staff in agreement with your comments? Calibrating how committed the employee is to achieving the goals. How truthful is your boss being about why you did not get promoted? Interviews. Is the interviewee exaggerating their experience? Calibrating whether the example you are using to demonstrate your experience is sufficient for the interviewer. Presentations and meetings. Calibrating whether your message is going down well or whether you need to adjust your approach. Your sensory acuity skills are the foundation of the next topic. Build rapport. Rapport. Rapport is the feeling of trust and cooperation between two or more people, so that they will become more receptive to what you are saying to them. It is an essential part of building good working relationships. Bandler and Grinder noticed that Erickson, as well as having excellent sensory acuity, was able to build a deep-level rapport as a way of influencing his clients to go into a trance. Why is rapport so useful? Rapport is one of the principles for success, Chapter 3, and is fundamental to all effective communication in the workplace. You will be far more likely to be positively influenced by someone you trust and feel comfortable with than by someone you don't. Equally, you will be much better able to influence customers and colleagues if they trust you and feel comfortable with you. Here are some specific examples of how rapport will help you at work. Selling. whether in the traditional sense of products and services or selling ideas to colleagues, suppliers, patients, and students. Being selected at interviews. Negotiating more effectively, including if the negotiations become tense. Coaching, because at times a coach will need to really challenge a client. Presenting ideas to groups, for example, meetings, presentations. Handling conflicts and challenging conversations. Many people I speak to have been taught about building rapport during various management and influencing skill courses. This indicates how useful this topic is in the workplace. Some principles underpinning rapport. There are some key principles underpinning rapport. Firstly, rapport is about influencing people appropriately, not manipulating them to do something they do not want to do. Even if the latter were possible, most businesses espouse ethical business practices, creating customer loyalty, reputation, and relationships, and generally creating win-win scenarios. Another principle relates to the notion that people tend to like people who are like them to some degree. See Chapter 36 in Leigh Thompson's The Truth About Negotiations. The third principle is that most communication is nonverbal. Research by Mehrabian, Birdwhistle, and others suggests that words make up only 7% of communication, with voice tonality making up 38% and body language 55%. Most of our conscious attention in a conversation is taken up by listening to the words, so up to 93% of a communication may be outside our conscious awareness. Even if these numbers are not totally correct, we know they have some validity. If you imagine a client saying how pleased they are to see you, but in a monotonous voice, with slouched posture and looking away from you, you would probably think that they weren't so pleased. Research into mirror neurons and mother-child communication has shown that when there is rapport between two people, there is a form of unconscious communication, where both parties naturally feel comfortable. Finally, rapport is something that almost everyone experiences automatically with people they like and feel comfortable with. Observe people at a business networking event or at a conference, and you will see people engrossed in a conversation demonstrating the signs of rapport that we will discuss in the following section. How to build rapport. Given that most communication is nonverbal, and that people who are in some way like each other tend to like each other, if you can demonstrate nonverbally that you are like your work contacts, they will probably like you, or at least feel comfortable with you. The way to do this is by matching and/or mirroring elements of the other person or persons, physiology, voice tonality, or words. Matching and mirroring are similar to each other, the difference being that, in terms of physiology, if your colleague has their right hand on their chin, you would be matching them if you are facing them with your right hand on your chin, and mirroring them if you had your left hand on your chin. It is generally considered by NLP practitioners that mirroring is more effective than matching, although I am unaware of any definitive evidence. If you can also match one person's physiology with a different part of your own, for example, if they are tapping their foot, you could tap your finger at the same speed, known as crossover matching. I will use the term matching from now onward to cover all three types. Here are key things you can match. Physiology, 55%. Posture, such as hand on chin, leaning forward, back, or to the side. Gestures. Please do this only when it is your turn to talk. Breathing patterns, such as speed and location, for example, chest or stomach. Facial expressions. Amount of eye contact. Though this is not traditionally covered in NLP courses, it is nonetheless implicit in building rapport. Style of dress. Again, this is not a specific NLP point, although in a business context it is usually important to dress in keeping with the culture. Voice, 38%. Speed of speaking. Volume of speaking. Tone, high or low pitch and intonation. Timbre, the quality or resonance of the voice. Words, 7%. Amount of detail. Lots of detail, just the overview, or a combination. Generally, the more senior or experienced in a role someone is, the less they will require detail. Common experiences. For example, hobbies, holiday locations, children. Keywords and phrases that they use or that are used in their industry or profession. Predicates. These are words denoting whether the person is thinking in pictures, sounds, or feelings. For example, if someone says, "From my point of view," this indicates they are thinking in pictures, view. If they say, "That idea resonates with me," they are probably thinking in sounds, resonate. This topic is covered in detail in Chapter 6. More specifically, you would pace the person by matching one or two aspects of the previous list until you felt there was some rapport, and then, if appropriate, you would lead them toward where you wanted them to be. You may hear people who have studied NLP refer to building rapport as pacing and leading. See Indicators of Rapport for more on this. It is important to remember to use common sense, and that a little goes a long way. Please do not match every single movement, because it will be very obvious and the other person will probably become uncomfortable. It is more effective to pick one or two elements, and do it subtly, out of the other person's conscious awareness. If someone you are seeking to build rapport with happens to use exaggerated gestures or postures, you could match this to some degree. If matching it to the same degree would feel too unnatural or inappropriate, a little goes a long way. Indicators of rapport. How would you know you were in rapport? You might observe slight skin color changes in the other person, using your sensory acuity skills, and/or you might feel really comfortable with them, even feeling as if you've met them before or known them for a while. You might also casually touch, for example, your cheek, and if they automatically touch theirs, this indicates that you have led them because you are in rapport. Other ways of pacing and leading include initially altering your voice speed or volume toward the other person's level, pacing, and then, once you feel you're in rapport, you would lead them to a voice speed or volume that felt more comfortable. For example, if your client naturally speaks very quickly and you naturally speak more slowly, you could increase your speed for a little while until you felt there was some rapport, and then let it slow down somewhat to a level that you both feel comfortable with. Exercise 5.1. Pay attention to people in meetings or at business networking events. Notice how they naturally match each other when they are engrossed in conversation, and how they mismatch when they are not enjoying the conversation and want to leave or move on to the next person. Applications at work. Pacing and leading individuals. By now you will have realized that building rapport is so important that it underpins every working relationship, ranging from colleagues, suppliers, clients and customers, patients, students, and at meetings such as appraisals, interviews, and presentations. The principles of pacing and leading can be applied more generally rather than simply matching body language, voice, and words. For example, if you want to persuade a colleague about an idea you have been working on, as well as building rapport as outlined previously, you could pace their current level of knowledge by explaining it to them in ways that you know they would understand, and gradually take them to the level of understanding that you have built up. Equally, if you know that they are the type of person who wants the information quickly, avoid wasting time with explanation unless they request it. Breaking rapport can occasionally be useful too. For example, beginning to gather your papers signals that you would like the meeting to end. Or, as a salesman, leaving the client some time to reflect before actually committing to buy while you request to make a phone call or go to the restroom. This can be useful where there is a cooling-off period, for example, on certain personal finance contracts. It is possible that you might have built such a high degree of rapport that the client will buy from you, only to reflect and cancel due to buyer's remorse. It is far better to gently and briefly break rapport by, for example, going to the restroom, in order to give the client time to reflect alone before signing the forms. Applications at work. Pacing and leading groups. You can build rapport with groups as well as with individuals. Here are some examples. When doing a presentation to a group, at or near the start, you can ask for a show of hands on both sides of a particular topic, and raise your hand as you ask it. For example, I will often ask, "Who has heard me speaking before?" followed by, "And who is seeing me for the first time?" By doing this, you are in rapport with the group, because almost all, if not all, of the audience will have raised their hand to match or mirror yours. Another question I have found to be useful is, "Raise your hand if you'd like to finish a little early today." I rarely need to ask the opposite question. If you are at a meeting or doing a presentation where you know there will be some resistance to people being there, for example, a compulsory meeting at 4 p.m. on a Friday before a holiday weekend, rather than being really energetic from the start, you could indicate that you are aware of how they are feeling and pace it before leading. For example, you can say, "I know it's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend, and I guess some of you may not be looking forward to this meeting." Pause and look for signs of agreement. "So here's what I suggest. Let's be really focused on getting the meeting done as quickly and productively as possible so that we can all go home and enjoy the weekend." Please reflect before you do this to be as sure as you can that your assumption is correct. If they were looking forward to the meeting, you would have inadvertently planted negative thoughts in their minds. If you are at a meeting with a group of prospective clients or at a panel interview, you will find that there will be some common postures. For example, some might have their legs crossed, others their hand on their chin, others leaning forward, others leaning back. Pick a leg-related posture and arm-related posture that match as many people as possible. When you feel that you have built rapport with those people, probably after a minute or two, subtly change so that you are matching the others that you have not matched. And keep doing this so that you are in rapport with everyone for large portions of the meeting. If there happens to be someone who appears most influential, not necessarily the most senior, concentrate on maintaining rapport with that person throughout, in addition to periodically switching to build rapport with everyone else. Breaking rapport with a group might be useful. As a manager, you can leave the room during a team meeting, leaving your team to make some decisions that they will be responsible for implementing before returning to the room. Chapter 6. Communicating in everyone's language. Altering your style to suit the listener. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Nelson Mandela. In English, as in many other languages, there are 4 main preferences that influence the type of language that a person will use. Knowing about this will help you to put your point across in such a way that everyone will grasp what you are saying, and therefore see what you mean, because you will be communicating in the way they automatically process information, even if they are not consciously aware of it. Why is this so useful? There are several reasons why this material is so useful at work, both for individuals and groups. You will be able to improve your communication when selling, presenting, managing, advertising, and negotiating, because you will be able to communicate in the way other people think and want to receive information. This helps to avoid situations where you say the same thing to different people and get very different responses. Improve your capabilities where they are linked to senses, such as listening skills, creativity, and creative problem solving. Coach others in the previous areas. Build rapport using words. Before we expand on this, we need to cover some fundamentals. How we gather and process information. As you remember from the communication model, Chapter 2, we receive external information using our 5 senses and process the information internally using the same 5 senses. Additionally, we have an internal dialogue about this information, that is, putting words to it. These senses are known as representational systems, that is, how we represent or re-present to ourselves information. Our representational systems are see, visual, hear, auditory, feel, kinesthetic, smell, olfactory, taste, gustatory. In addition to these 5 senses, there is an internal dialogue about events. This internal dialogue, or self-talk, is known as auditory digital. For example, you may have just been promoted and become entitled to a company car. When you go into the showroom, you might see, visual, a particular car, and you might say to yourself, auditory digital, that's the one I want. Though each of us uses all of the representational systems to some degree, many people have 1 or 2 senses that they prefer to use, known as their preferred or primary representational system. We will cover preferred systems in the next section. Generally, in Western culture, the olfactory and gustatory systems, though important for survival, are not as important as they are for people living a more subsistence type of lifestyle. So, the other 3 senses, together with auditory digital, are more dominant. Let's look at these 4 main representational systems. Visual. This consists of external images, creating images, and visualizing in our mind, as well as remembering pictures and images you have seen. Auditory. This consists of external sounds, creating sounds in our mind, and remembering sounds, music, or words you have heard. Kinesthetic. This is made up of external touch, internal sensations and emotions, as well as bodily awareness. Auditory digital. This is your internal dialogue and assessment about a topic. Preferred representational systems. In the field of NLP, it is generally thought that approximately 35 to 40% of people prefer the visual system, 20 to 25% prefer the auditory or auditory digital system, 40% of people prefer the kinesthetic system. This is important to know because, as a generalization, you tend to communicate according to your preferences, which can be effective provided you are communicating with people who have a similar preference, and not so effective if they have a different preference from you. Certain professions may have a stronger bias toward a specific system because of the inherent nature of the work. Architects and designers tend to prefer the visual system. Musicians and telesalespeople tend to prefer the auditory system. Computer engineers, doing repairs, and physiotherapists tend to prefer the kinesthetic system. Accountants, lawyers, and business analysts tend to prefer the auditory digital system. Exercise 6.1. Approximately 10 minutes. Please complete the Preferred Representational System questionnaire available in the companion PDF to this audiobook. This will indicate your preferred system. Tip 6.1. Please note that the percentages and the results from exercise 6.1 are indications, and preference does not necessarily equate to competence. For example, if your least preferred system is auditory, it does not mean that you are a bad listener. Recognizing preferred representational systems. Here are some indications of how to recognize preferred representational systems in the workplace, and hence how people will tend to behave. This section has some generalizations that may not be true for every single person. Visual. That is, they prefer to think in pictures and diagrams. Speak fast. They think in pictures, and a picture paints 1,000 words, and gesticulate quickly. Use visual language, such as see, look, appear, focus, paint a picture, mental image, clear, in view of, hazy, show, look forward to, illuminate, visualize, imagine, review, I see your point, short-sighted, take a dim view of. Have hobbies and do work that involves seeing things, such as art, watching films or photography, or they like the visual aspect of their pastimes, such as looking at scenery while walking in the country. Remember things better when they have seen them, and especially like diagrams, flowcharts, and pictures. Learn by seeing, such as by looking at diagrams, videos, flowcharts, and pictures. Like things to be neat and tidy. The way something or someone looks is important. Auditory. That is, they prefer to communicate using words. Speak at a medium pace, often in a rhythmic or melodious way. Use auditory language, such as hear, sound, listen, speak, discuss, converse, tune in or tune out, resonate, I'm all ears, voice an opinion, ask, tell, announce, rings a bell, music to my ears, loud and clear, the same wavelength, harmonize. Have hobbies and do work that involves hearing or words, such as reciting poetry, listening to music, speaking to their friends on the phone, or they like the auditory aspect of their pastimes, such as hearing the sounds of nature when walking in the country. Remember things better when they have discussed or heard them. Learn by hearing, by listening to audio material or hearing explanations. Auditory digital. That is, they prefer to think in ideas and to analyze. Want to understand how ideas work? Are interested in ideas that make sense and are logical. Use language that is not sensory-specific, such as conceive, evaluate, assess, think, understand, know, learn, process, decide, consider, change, make sense, logical process, modify our thinking, change of mind. The rationale is. need facts, figures, and evidence, can exhibit the characteristics of any of the three other main systems. Kinesthetic, that is, they prefer to feel and experience things. Speak at a slow pace. Use kinesthetic language such as solid, grasp, connect, concrete, make contact, kick some ideas around, hard, soft, rough, smooth the way for something, get hold of, get in touch with, catch onto, touch base with, get a handle on, lay our cards on the table, pull some strings. Have hobbies and do work that involves touching or emotions, such as physiotherapy, pottery, or sports, or they like the kinesthetic aspect of their pastimes, such as feeling the fresh air when walking in the country. Walking is a kinesthetic activity anyway. Remember things better when they have experienced them. Learn best by doing, by putting into practice and experimenting with what they have been taught. By being able to recognize someone's preference, you will be more likely to be able to present information in a way that they like to receive it, and you'll also be better to influence them. Using representational systems at work. For yourself. Because most people communicate according to their own sensory preferences, enhancing the ease with which you can use any of the four main representational systems will help you become more flexible in communicating with people, regardless of their sensory preferences. This fluency, in addition to being able to recognize other people's preferred system, will help you communicate and build rapport, regardless of the work you do. Tip 6.2. You can enhance your ability to access and use your less favored representational system, or systems, by way of relevant practice. Here are some examples. Visual. Memorize work-related diagrams, gradually increasing the complexity, or even do spot the difference puzzles. Auditory. Listen to the radio or audio learning material. Kinesthetic. Check how you feel about work-related issues, or, if appropriate, walk through a process step by step. Auditory digital. Think about the logical reasons and, or, seek appropriate facts and figures about a work-related topic. With other individuals and groups. When presenting information to a specific individual at work, such as a customer, staff member, supplier, or trainee, where possible, seek to identify their preferred system and then present information accordingly by focusing the presentation style as follows. Pictures and diagrams, visual. Make them neat. Discussion, auditory. Involve the person in some way, for example, by letting them try out your new product, kinesthetic. Facts and figures, auditory digital. Please remember to use a combination of the four systems, because even if the person has a preference for one system, this does not mean that they will not use others to some degree. Story 6.1. One of my colleagues used to be an educational sales representative, with around 200 head teachers and college principals in her sales area. After she completed her NLP practitioner course, she made a note of the preferred representational system of each of her sales contacts, using the information shown in Recognizing Preferred Representational Systems. For those with a visual preference, she wanted to see them face to face, making sure that she was always neatly dressed and that she gave them glossy brochures or showed them products. For those with an auditory preference, she would phone them for a chat, and whenever she saw them, she made sure that she had time to chat with them about products. For those with a kinesthetic preference, she would take them cakes or make sure that she could have a sandwich with them. Eating cakes and sandwiches is a kinesthetic as well as gustatory activity, and she would give them the chance to try out the products. For those with an auditory digital preference, she would make sure that she knew the relevant facts, figures, and scientific studies. Within 6 months, she had significantly improved her sales performance. Exercise 6.2. Following on from Story 6.1, identify the 1 or 2 preferred representational systems of important work colleagues and clients, and present information to them accordingly. Following on from an earlier point, use a combination of all 4 presentational methods when presenting information to groups. This will help engage the whole audience in the topic. The same principles can be used when presenting ideas by way of email or reports. When making formal presentations or running training courses, consider using neat and colorful flip charts instead of or in addition to PowerPoint slides. The flip charts can be put on the wall to create a visual reminder throughout the course, as opposed to a PowerPoint slide that disappears as you move on to the next slide. Tip 6.3. If you manage a team, ask them all to complete the Representational System Preference Questionnaire in the companion PDF, and then discuss the results and how it reflects their individual preferences for receiving information. Another use of representational systems is the area of consultancy and problem solving. This is best illustrated by the following example. Story 6.2. An ex-colleague told me how he used the principles of representational systems to help a client make more progress in 2 hours than a major consultancy firm was able to do in several weeks. He and I spoke at an NLP conference, and we decided to demonstrate how the process worked. There were 13 attendees, none of whom had met each other before. One was a manager of a steel factory that had some production problems. No one else knew anything about steel production. Under the guidance of the factory manager, the other 12 delegates laid out pieces of paper on the floor to represent the different departments and areas involved in the process. This provided a visual image of the situation. There were various discussions about the current and desired situation, including relevant facts, which allowed for auditory and auditory digital processing. A small object was used to represent the movement of steel through the factory, and delegates were encouraged to move the object and write notes if they wanted to. This was the kinesthetic element. Within the 45 minutes allotted, the factory manager said that he had at least 2 excellent ideas directly as a result of this consultancy project from complete novices. Sensory-based language. Talk to people in their own language. If you do it well, they'll say, "God, he said exactly what I was thinking." And when they begin to respect you, they'll follow you to the death. Lee Iacocca, former president at Ford Motor Company and Chrysler. We can extend the use of representational systems to the area of language. As we covered in Chapter 2, language is the way that we turn our thoughts into words. Given that we think in pictures, sounds, feelings, and self-talk, it is not surprising that our words reflect this. Earlier in the chapter, we looked at how to recognize someone's preferred representational system. One of the indicators was the words they use. For example, someone thinking visually will use words and phrases such as look, see, watch, paint a picture, focus, and point of view. By being able to tune into what people are saying, you will be able to quickly pick up and understand how they are thinking. In NLP, words and phrases indicating which representational system someone is using are called predicates. Why are predicates so useful? Being able to use appropriate predicates is one of the ways you can use words to build rapport. This is because it helps you to communicate in a way that is being used to process at that moment by your client, colleague, interviewer, and so on. Linked to this, given that we think using our senses, using sensory-based words will engage people at work more than using more neutral words. This is particularly useful for advertising, as many adverts seek to activate our senses. For example, newspaper adverts often use glossy images, and radio adverts use catchy jingles. Using predicates. Under the section, Recognizing Preferred Representational Systems, from the companion PDF, I listed several predicates for each of the 4 systems. These are examples, and not an exhaustive list. Unless you are writing to someone whose representational system preference you know, and where you know that only that person will be reading the information, I suggest that you use a combination of predicates appropriately when writing emails, sales letters, advertising copy, and reports. Even if reports are very factual, using predicates will engage the reader. When making presentations, and the other examples covered under Using Representational Systems at Work. Chapter 7. The Power of Language. Advanced Speaking and Listening Skills at Work. Change your language, and you change your thoughts. Carl Albrecht, billionaire co-founder of the Aldi supermarket chain. In the previous chapter, we discussed some aspects of language and how to use these at work. In this chapter, we will cover how to use other aspects of language to enhance your ability to communicate to colleagues, customers, and other stakeholders. In particular, we will look at how to think in terms of the big picture or detail as appropriate, and to change the level of the communication. Use language to encourage lateral thinking and brainstorming. Understand the power of some everyday words. Use language that is deliberately vague to influence at work. Ask insightful and relevant questions. Use stories and analogies effectively at work. Please note that though there is some terminology and names of language patterns used in this chapter, it is not a chapter on grammar. In this chapter, I will highlight how the language patterns and models which you will learn here are used in every verbal communication at work. The only question is, how effectively are they used? Why are we covering language? As we have already seen, language is one of the key filters in the communication model, and words are important when maintaining rapport, especially once rapport has initially been built. Effective use of language can also help almost all business activities involving presenting ideas and asking questions, such as selling, marketing, and advertising, influencing staff, colleagues, patients, and suppliers, negotiations, consultancy, coaching, training and teaching, presenting, interviewing, as interviewer or interviewee. Let's look at the first main topic, known as the hierarchy of ideas. The hierarchy of ideas. This model relates to the level of detail involved in a communication, which can range from the big picture and abstract, known in NLP as big chunk, through to the specific and detailed, small chunk. We can use this model to change our own or other people's level from big chunk to small chunk or vice versa, and also to think laterally. Examples of abstract, big chunk ideas in the workplace include concepts such as efficiency, productivity, prosperity, equal opportunities, and growth prospects. Detail, small chunk, is obtained by getting into the specifics of who, what, when, where, and how. One of the main reasons why this is so useful is that, according to Please Understand Me by Kiersey and Bates, which explains the well-known Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI personality profiling system, the difference between big and small chunk are a major source of communication difficulties and disagreements between people. Other business uses of this model include being able to build rapport at work. One of the ways to build rapport using words is to match chunk size. For example, if a director has a preference for big chunk, typically he would want an overview of your message rather than lots of detail. Improving your chances of promotion, because generally the more senior you are, the more you will need to be able to see the overview as well as be able to drill down into the detail if there are problems. For example, a finance director will need to understand how the whole business works and how the finances of the business are impacted by changes in foreign exchange rates and the economic situation, whereas an accounts clerk is more likely to be concerned with details shown on specific invoices. You can use the hierarchy of ideas to move to a bigger chunk, known as chunking up or upward, for the purpose of, for example, gaining agreement and buy-in when negotiating and speaking to teams. Most people would agree that prosperity, a big chunk concept, is desirable. They may disagree on how to get there or what prosperity actually means. Setting mission statements and values, both are big chunk concepts for an organization, which helps to create an engaged workforce. Agreeing on the purpose of a new policy or system so that management can select one that fully meets their needs. Conversely, you can use the hierarchy of ideas to move to a smaller chunk, known as chunking down or downward, for the purpose of, for example, making sure that everyone involved in a project knows exactly what they are doing and when, so that targets or deadlines are met. Coaching or managing people around the specific tasks required to achieve their goals. Investigating problems or underperformance to help resolve it. How to use the principles of chunking. Let's assume that you were discussing the purchase of a new computer system. Here are some questions to ask if you want to chunk up. What is the benefit or purpose of the new system? What will the new system get for you or us? What is the new system an example of? What is the intention of having the new system? As the speaker, you would choose the question or questions most relevant to the specific situation and what you wanted to gain from asking the question, given what had been said previously in the discussion. To chunk down, you could ask the following questions. Who exactly will authorize the purchase of the new system? Who will we buy it from? When will the purchase be authorized? When will it be delivered? How much will the new system cost? How exactly are we going to use the new system? Where exactly are you going to put the new system? What is the specification of the new system? What are examples or types of new systems that we could buy in the future? Exercise 7.1. Notice for yourself whether you are more comfortable in the big picture, the detail, or are equally comfortable with both. You can do this several ways. For example, noticing how comfortable or not you are when getting into the details of a situation. Asking yourself the chunking up and chunking down questions about various work challenges, and noticing where you feel most comfortable. You can also do this with clients, colleagues, and staff by noticing how much detail they give you, and also how tolerant they are to detail. This point is expanded in Chapter 15 in the section on Chunk Size Filter. Remember that one way to build rapport using words is to match the amount of detail that someone prefers. You can use the hierarchy of ideas to chunk laterally, for example, if you have reached an impasse when negotiating or in a brainstorming session. You do this as follows. 1. Ask a chunking up question from those listed on the Hierarchy of Ideas Diagram 7.1, available in the companion PDF. 2. Chunk down, asking for a different example or a different way. Story 7.1 illustrates this. Story 7.1. One of my NLP mentors was hired to help a company negotiate with a trade union. He spoke to the company management and asked what they wanted, then chunked up a couple of levels until very abstract concepts were mentioned, such as expansion. He spoke to the unions, and unsurprisingly, they wanted a pay raise. He asked them some chunking up questions and found that the real purpose of the pay raise was so that the employees could have a comfortable retirement. Thinking laterally, he asked himself, the unions, and the management how else employees could have a comfortable retirement rather than by having the level of pay increase being demanded. They realized that increased pension contributions would be an acceptable way forward, and hence proceeded to agree on the various details. So, in this example, chunking up to comfortable retirement and then asking for a different way to achieve this led to an agreement. Tip 7.1. To enhance your ability to work with both detail and abstract concepts, pick a current challenge at work and chunk up a few levels until you reach a highly abstract concept. For example, profitability, staff engagement, or fulfillment. Chunk downward a few levels from the challenge until you understand the necessary detail. If you are naturally stronger at one level, work on the opposite until you are more comfortable at that level, if that would be useful to you. The hierarchy of ideas is summarized in Diagram 7.1 in the companion PDF. Applications in the workplace. You can use the hierarchy of ideas in several ways at work. Career progression. You could frequently ask yourself chunking up questions about work issues and topics. For example, an accounts clerk looking to advance their career might ask themselves, what's the purpose of making sure that all the invoices are dispatched correctly and on time? Generally, the higher you go in an organization, the more you will be expected to see a bigger picture. Coaching and managing other people to improve by using relevant questions. Goal setting. If you review Chapter 4, you will notice that there are questions that chunk up and others that chunk down. Creating alternative solutions and problem solving using lateral chunking. Conflict resolution and negotiations. Chunk up and then chunk down only as quickly as it enables you to maintain rapport. Fact-finding and troubleshooting. Chunking down. Meetings. Ensure that they stay on track by knowing the purpose of the meeting. Chunking up. And also, if a comment appears to be taking the meeting off track, asking politely how that point specifically relates to the purpose of the meeting. Creating a corporate vision or mission statement by chunking up to a really abstract level. Generating action plans at meetings or for projects, chunking down. Having covered the idea of chunking, let's now move on to another model of language. Implied meanings within language. Within NLP, there is a topic called linguistic presuppositions. These are completely different from the NLP presuppositions covered in Chapter 3. Linguistic presuppositions can be defined as what is automatically assumed in a sentence or phrase in order for that sentence to make sense. For example, the sentence, The man sees the dog presupposes three things. There is a man. He can see. There is a dog. Though this example is very obvious, this model of language will help you to refine your communication so that you influence the listener, or listeners, and readers the way you want to, and to better understand how people think by how they speak. Remember Covey's quote, "Seek first to understand, then be understood." Moreover, if you read the editorial articles in a quality national newspaper, you will find several examples of how the editor uses linguistic presuppositions, whether they are aware of it or not. You cannot avoid using these models because they are inherent in language. You can, however, choose to learn how to use them even more effectively than you currently do. The main forms of linguistic presupposition. We will cover 10 main forms. I will give you the name and brief explanation of the presupposition with an example of how you can use each of them in the workplace. There are almost unlimited uses of this type of language, so there will be no specific section on application in the workplace. For more extensive coverage and a list of 29 types of linguistic presupposition, please read The Structure of Magic, Volume 1, by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. The statements that follow are standalone statements, purely to illustrate the points being made. It is important to remember that these sentences do not have to be true. They do not need to be plausible, given the context in which they are said. In each of the examples that follow, the presupposition being demonstrated is emphasized for your reference. As with all topics covered in this audiobook, please ensure that you are in rapport, have a positive intention for the other person or persons, and use common sense when using these language patterns. Existence. These are nouns, places, and people, and every sentence will have at least one presupposition of existence included in it. When managing a member of staff, you could say, "Let me know when you've found the solution," or "You haven't found the solution yet." Both presuppose that a solution exists, which can motivate your colleague to keep searching for one. Necessity. These are verbs such as have to, got to, should, must, and need to, which indicate the rules or beliefs that someone has. You can use these verbs if you want to create some form of rule or strongly encourage people to do something. We need to hurry up. We should be hitting our targets this year. You've got to get this right. Possibility, impossibility. These are verbs that imply that things are possible or not possible, such as can or can't, could or couldn't, might or might not, is possible or isn't possible. We can't tell our boss this. We could exceed our targets. You can do a great presentation. You can use these when advertising to create the impression that something will become possible for the customer once they have purchased your product or service. Notice the second word in this sentence. This is another example of how this linguistic presupposition can be used. Causation. These are words or verbs that imply some form of causation or link. For example, if, then, because, make, cause, as you, then you. You can use these types of words to create a linkage in someone's mind, if that would be useful. Because you've made so many cold calls this quarter, you'll become more successful. If you present well, then you'll be noticed. Learning from mistakes makes you more effective. Equivalences. These are when two things or concepts are made to appear equal or synonymous. For example, verbs such as to be, to mean, to represent. You are a good negotiator. That is, you equals good negotiator. Keeping eye contact when interviewing means you are interested. My boss shouting means she is really passionate about results. $1,000 represents good value. You can use these to create a relationship or connection between two concepts. For example, you and good negotiator, $1,000 and good value. Please note that causation relates to a sequence, whereas equivalence relates to things being simultaneous. Awareness. This presupposition relates to people being able to be aware of something and is indicated by the use of words relating to senses or awareness. For example, see, hear, feel, understand, realize, notice, and to be aware of. You can use these types of presuppositions to reduce the likelihood of objections or doubt about whether something exists. John saw the gap in the market. The reader or listener would probably not question whether there was in fact a gap in the market. You realized that there was a great opportunity. She noticed the excellent atmosphere in the office. It is also interesting that the previous sentences could be stated in the negative, where the presuppositions would still apply. So, John didn't see the gap in the market still presupposes that there's a gap in the market. Time. The concept of time is really important in how we create our reality. Though some of the finer details are outside the scope of this audiobook, even the following simple example will illustrate the impact. We have a problem. Action is probably required. We had a problem. No action is required. Presuppositions of time can be indicated by words such as before, after, then, now, stop, yet, and by changing the verb's tense. Please let me know your plans after you've made your decision. Before you leave the office today, please check that the presentation is finished. Staff member. I've been having a problem with Joe. Coach, manager. Okay, what has been the problem? This subtly puts the problem into the past, rather than, okay, what is the problem, which unfortunately keeps it alive for the staff member. Adjective and adverb. Adjectives, which describe nouns, and adverbs, which describe verbs and usually end in ly, can add impact to a sentence. I'm wondering how easily you'll be able to find the solution. Easily focuses attention on how easy it will be, rather than whether a solution exists. How quickly will you be able to get me the report? Presupposes that the person will be able to do it. Client. This situation has been causing us delays for a while. Consultant. Wanting to reassure the client that they are experts and can fix the problem. Because we've been in this industry for years, we've seen relatively simple problems like this before. We can easily have it sorted for you in a week. Or indicates that there is a choice. Sometimes in business, you want to reduce the possibility of endless choices. For example, we can meet on Friday at 3:15 or Tuesday at 2. Which would you prefer? Cash or credit card. Ordinal and numerical. This relates to sequences or numbers of events, such as first, last, next, second, initial, and final. My latest book is about selling. Presupposes that the person has written books previously. Similarly, my fourth book implies that there have been 3 previous books and possibly subsequent books. Here's the 5th and final point. Once you've done that, let me know and I'll give you the next installment of the story. Presupposes that there is something else to be learned or done. Putting it all together. Scenario. A director addressing their team at the start of the annual staff meeting. Good morning. Welcome to our 3rd annual staff meeting. And the fact that there is such a big turnout means that you're all extremely excited to take the organization forward to the next level. The main reason we're all here is so that we can look for even better ways to do this after last year's great improvement. And we have to move forward because standing still means falling behind our competitors. And whether we move forward quickly or slightly less quickly, our aim has to be focused on our success and on becoming number 1. Exercise 7.2, approximately 5 minutes. Listen through the previous paragraph and see if you can spot how many examples of linguistic presuppositions are used. Check your answers against those in Appendix A, available in the companion PDF. Small words with big meanings. Following on from the previous topic, here are some small words that have disproportionately large meanings, which are often outside the conscious awareness of the speaker or listener. Small word. But. Although, however. Implied meaning. But negates what has previously been said, as do the other words to a lesser extent. That was a great presentation, but, however, although, you could make it even better by, implies that it wasn't a great presentation. Comment. It is much more useful to use and instead of but, unless you do want to negate what has been said. For example, if the speaker mentions something negative, such as all the difficulties they have had meeting the deadline, you can reply, "Yes, it was difficult, but you've learned so much from it." Small word. Try. Implied meaning. Try implies that something will be difficult and/or you might not succeed. As a manager, do you want your staff member to try to get you the report at 5 p.m. today, or to get you the report at 5 p.m. today? Comment. Remove the word try from your vocabulary, unless it is in a situation where the person has little competence in the area and you want them to experiment or try something new. Small word. Don't. Implied meaning. If you ask someone not to do something, they have to think about doing it, even momentarily, before they can think of an alternative. Don't think about your happiest moment now. This is particularly relevant when the subject relates to an automatic, unconscious response, such as, "Don't worry," or "Don't analyze my motives." Comment. Tell someone what you want them to do, rather than what you don't want them to do. If it is important to say what you don't want them to do, emphasize what you do want them to do. Relax, or go with the flow. Small word. Or. Implied meaning. As we know from the previous section, or can sometimes limit the perception someone has about their range of options. On my training courses, when I say, "You can do X or Y," and ask them how many options they have, the usual reply is 1 or 2. In practice, there are numerous options if you include all the other options that could exist apart from X or Y. Comment. Whenever you hear the word or, and you do not want your or other people's thinking to be limited, for example in brainstorming meetings, mention that it could be useful to explore other options apart from those that are presented. Small word. Yet. Implied meaning. Adding yet to the end of a sentence can change the meaning significantly. "I can't do presentations" is very different than "I can't do presentations yet." Comment. Adding yet when someone states an apparent limitation can open the door of possibility. Small word. If. When. Implied meaning. If implies conditionality. When implies that it will happen. Comment. Choose which will be most useful in this situation. If the board rejects our proposal, or when you buy this product. Small word. Can. Can't. Implied meaning. The word can and its negative can't have two possible meanings. One meaning is that the person is not allowed or authorized to do something. The other meaning is that the person does not have the capability to do something. Comment. Sometimes it can be useful to seek clarification about what someone means if they say they can't do something, or to clarify what you mean when you use can or can't. Small word. Is. Implied meaning. As we have seen before, the verb to be indicates that something equals something else. Unfortunately, the word is sometimes misused. For example, "This is difficult to do," or "It is hard to do X." The word is gives the sentence the same construction and validity as "The sun is hot." Comment. It is more useful for the speaker to say instead, "I haven't yet found it easy to do X." This language helps the speaker to own the specific challenge, rather than using language which could create the impression that it absolutely is a particular way. Exercise 7.3. Pay attention to what people are saying at meetings and notice how they use the small words previously listed and what impact these words have on you and on the people around you. In your mind, decide what you would say to make the message even more effective. As a separate exercise, practice using these words, or one of the relevant alternatives suggested, to enhance the message you wish to send. Abstract language. Returning to the hierarchy of ideas and the notion of abstract and specific thinking, there are two language models that can be extremely useful in the workplace. The first uses abstract language and is based on the language patterns used by the eminent hypnotherapist Milton Erickson. He used language in such a way that it appeared vague and abstract, which enabled his clients to make up their own meaning in their head. He found it to be an excellent way to bypass resistance that clients might have against going into a trance. Unsurprisingly, his language model is known as the Milton model. Why learn about abstract language? These language patterns are extremely useful for influencing people, and, indeed, there is an excellent book called Unlimited Selling Power by the leading business sales consultants Dr. Donald J. Moyne and Dr. Kenneth Lloyd, which explains how to use these hypnotic language patterns in the world of sales. They can also be used in a variety of situations where you want to influence, for example, in presentations and meetings. Because these language patterns are used every day at work, learning how to use them effectively will help you to influence more effectively. Story 7.2. One of my fellow NLP trainers said that she noticed that all businesses use these language patterns daily because they are part of everyday language. The problem was that these patterns were used in an ineffective way, which often caused the opposite effect to that which was intended. By the way, there are at least 5 examples of abstract language patterns in this story, which you will be able to spot once you have heard this section. There are around 22 abstract language patterns, and I will list and briefly explain the 15 most relevant to the workplace, with examples, with the subsequent 2 sections giving guidance on how to use them at work. Some of the patterns have already been covered in the section on linguistic presuppositions. The name of the pattern, as it is known in the NLP world, is mentioned if relevant. Please note that some of the patterns are similar to each other. Additional reading material is listed in the Resources for Further Learning section in the companion PDF to this audiobook. Pattern. Assumptions. Mind reads. Description. Claiming to know how someone is thinking or feeling. Examples at work. I know you're curious about how we can achieve our targets. You're probably wondering why this is such an important meeting. Pattern. Impersonal judgments. Lost performatives. Description. Making a judgment or assessment without saying who is doing the judging. Examples at work. It's good that you're curious about how we can achieve our targets. It's encouraging that you're so motivated. That's right. Pattern. Causations. Cause and effect. Description. Where one thing causes or leads to something else. Examples at work. Because you are here, you will learn lots of things. If you attend the seminars, you will get your professional qualification. Pattern. Equivalences. Complex equivalence. Description. Where one thing equals or means something else. Examples at work. Making these cold calls means you will hit your target. Putting our best people on your account demonstrates our commitment to you. This conversation is the start of a new relationship. Pattern. Presuppositions. Description. Where someone assumes that something is true. Examples at work. My clients are really interested in the great service I give them. This presupposes the person has clients, that they are interested in the service given, and that the service is great. Pattern. Universals. Universal quantifiers. Description. Global words such as all, every, each, none, no one, never, always. Examples at work. You all want the best for the team. We always strive to be responsive to our clients. We are never knowingly undersold. Pattern. Possibility, necessity. Modal operators of possibility or necessity. Description. Words that indicate rules, possibility or impossibility. Examples at work. We can't afford to let the competition get ahead of us. We need to keep on innovating. We mustn't fall into the trap of negative thinking. Pattern. Frozen verbs. Nominalizations. Description. These are process words turned into an abstract noun. commitment, to commit, decision, to decide, knowledge, to know, management, to manage, success, to succeed. Examples at work: our commitment to you. The decision has been made. The management of the process was excellent. My understanding is that we will proceed tomorrow. Pattern: unspecified verb. Description: where there is no evidence of how the verb is applied. Examples at work: he underestimated me. We can't continue. Pattern: inserted questions, tag questions. Description: questions used to either emphasize or gain agreement. Examples at work: you can do that, can't you? You know what I mean, don't you? You've been happy with our products before, haven't you? Pattern: simple deletions. Description: where so much information is left out that there could be various interpretations. Examples at work: I am happy with the weather, the results, the night's sleep I had. Pattern: unspecified person or subject, lack of referential index. Description: where it is not clear who is the subject of the sentence. Examples at work: they arrived on time. People say the results are improving. Pattern: unspecified comparisons, comparative deletions. Description: where something is compared to something else without stating what it is compared to. Advertisers use this frequently. Examples at work: we try harder. Our washing powder washed whiter. We give you better value. We offer you more. Pattern: pacing, pacing current experience. Please note that though this is not the same as pacing to build in rapport, Chapter 5, it often has the effect of demonstrating that you are on the same wavelength as people, which will aid rapport building. Description: making a statement or series of statements that is undeniably true. This is similar to the yes set used in selling, whereby salespeople will seek to get the customer into the habit of saying yes, with a view to then getting them to say yes to buying the product. Examples at work: you're sitting here, listening to my audiobook, learning about language patterns. In a seminar: you've come here on this sunny, cloudy, dry, wet day to learn about how to... Pattern: impossible behaviors, selectional restriction violations. Description: where it is not possible for someone or something to have the response or do the behavior. Examples at work: this house is crying out for a careful, loving owner. Real estate agent. This car loves to be driven firmly. Sports car salesperson. Putting it all together. Scenario: you are setting the scene for an important meeting about business development. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Some of you have traveled a long distance, some a shorter distance to be here on time. I guess you're probably wondering why I asked you to come here on this sunny morning. And it's good that you're wondering, because this curiosity is the basis of how we can move forward to achieve the success and excellence that we all want to achieve. We all want more success and to be happy, don't we? And that's good, because in this economic environment, we need to progress. People expect it. Successful companies never stand still. Successful companies keep looking for ways forward. Exercise 7.4, approximately 5 minutes. Re-listen to the previous paragraph and notice how each of the abstract patterns was used at least once. Check your answers against those in Appendix A, available in the companion PDF to this audiobook. Applications in the workplace. These Milton Model abstract language patterns can be used in a variety of situations, such as selling, to bypass resistance, presenting, to captivate the audience, inspiring a team, coaching a client, running a training course, advertising. Here is a brief extract from the financial reports of a global motor manufacturer talking about one of its guiding principles to illustrate how even the most competitive businesses use these types of language constructs, whether knowingly or otherwise. I note the key Milton Model language pattern and/or the linguistic presupposition. This principle is intended to keep the customer at the center of everything, universal, we do, unspecified verb, and success, frozen verb, is, equivalence, pretty easy, adjective, to define. It means, equivalence, creating vehicles that people, unspecified person, desire, value, and are proud to own. When we get this right, it, cause and effect, transforms our reputation and the company's bottom line. Just look, awareness, at the performance of the 2000 XX Model 1 in the United States and compare it to the Model 2 2 years previously. Time. The average transaction price for Model 2 is about 28% higher. Its projected resale value after 3 years is 32% higher, and it gets 14% better highway fuel economy, according to EPA estimates. This is, equivalence, the kind of success, existence, we plan to replicate every universal opportunity we get. Exercise 7.5. Record or watch on the Internet an interview with a politician or business leader. Notice how often the interviewee uses Milton model patterns, whether they realize it or not, and also notice the impact that each pattern has on you. Let's now look at more detailed language. Power questions. If you do not know how to ask the right question, you will discover nothing. William Edwards Deming, American business philosopher and consultant. Just as there is a language model using abstract language, there is a model that uses more specific language, and which seeks to ask questions to uncover information that might have been deleted, distorted, or generalized. These questions are based on those that the eminent therapist Virginia Satir, one of the other therapists modeled by Bandler and Grinder when developing NLP, asked when working with her clients. They can be easily used at work to uncover relevant information and will help you to ask the right kind of question at the right time. In NLP, these power questions are known as the meta model and occasionally as the precision model. Why power questions are so useful? Knowing the right kind of question to ask can be useful in many situations. For example, selling, to uncover where the client's problems are and the related implications. Handling objections. Coaching, to get specific about the client's actions. Project planning. Meetings, to ensure that actions are agreed. The questions. As we discussed in Chapter 2, every person deletes, distorts, and generalizes information. Given that we all do this, it is not surprising that the language we use reflects these internal filtering processes. Let's consider the language patterns that fall into these three categories and the related meta-model question. You will recognize the patterns from the Milton model before. There is sometimes more than one possible response, and these are listed. Please use common sense when choosing which question to ask, or, indeed, whether to ask a meta-model question at all. Distortions. Pattern. Assumptions. Mind reads. Example. I know you're curious why I called the meeting. Question or response. How do you know I'm curious? Pattern. Impersonal judgments. Lost performatives. Example. It's good to work hard. Question or response. Who says it's good? How do you know it's good? Pattern. Causations. Cause and effect. Example. Presentations make me nervous. Question or response. How specifically do they make you feel nervous? Pattern. Equivalences. Complex equivalence. Example. The client not returning my call means he's not interested. Question or response. How does the client not returning your call mean he's not interested? Have you ever not returned someone's call quickly and yet been interested? That is, counterexample. Pattern. Presuppositions. Example. If my boss was really interested in us, he would spend more time telling people how good we are. Question or response. How do you know your boss isn't interested in you? How do you know he doesn't tell people how good you are? Generalizations. Pattern. Universals. Universal quantifiers. Example. We never buy from new suppliers. We always get 5 quotes. Question or response. Never. Surely you must have bought from a new supplier at some time. Always? What would happen if you didn't? Look for counterexamples. Pattern. Possibility, impossibility. Modal operators of possibility or impossibility. Example. We can't buy from you. I might work hard this week. Question or response. What would happen if you did? What stops you? What would happen if you didn't? Pattern. Necessity. Modal operators of necessity. Example, we have to expand abroad. Question or response, what would happen if we didn't? Pattern. Frozen verbs. Nominalizations. Example, the communication is poor in this office. I don't like his style of management. Question or response, how would you like people to communicate instead? Turn the noun back into a process. How would you like him to manage instead? Pattern. Unspecified verbs. Example, he ignored us. Question or response, what specifically did he do or not do that made you think he ignored you? Pattern. Simple deletions. I'm upset. Question or response, about what exactly? Pattern. Unspecified person or subject. Lack of referential index. Example, they're not comfortable. Question or response, who exactly isn't comfortable? Pattern. Unspecified comparisons. Comparative deletions. Example, that's expensive. Your competitors are better. Question or response, compared to what? Better than who or what? In what way exactly are they better? As you will have spotted, many of the Milton model patterns have an associated metamodal response because they are either end of the spectrum of language. Because distortions tend to have the biggest impact on people's thinking, followed by generalizations and then deletions, if there's more than one type in a sentence, challenge the distortions before the generalizations, and generalizations before deletions. Tip 7.2. Please be clear about the purpose of asking a power question. I have seen people use these questions as a way to annoy other people and hijack a discussion, which has no tangible benefit for anyone. Exercise 7.6. Revisit the interview with a politician or business leader mentioned in Exercise 7.5. Listen to the questions that the interviewer is asking to obtain information. With your knowledge now, what questions would you ask instead? Which statements made by the politician or business leader would you challenge, and using which questions? Applications of power questions. There are numerous work applications. Interviewing candidates to find out what they actually did in previous roles. Interviewing prospective employers to find out exactly what the role entails. Selling to find out exactly what the prospect wants and how they would know that they had it. Managing and coaching to pin down employees and clients about what they are going to do and when. Project planning and actions from meetings to agree who exactly will do what and by when. Contracts and negotiations to ensure that the details are as you want. Let's now move on to the final language topic. Stories, analogies, and metaphors. The use of stories, analogies, and metaphors can be an effective way to illustrate and explain the point you are making to staff, clients, and interviewers, overcome resistance to your ideas from staff, prospects, customers, and coaching clients, help your audience to remember the points you are making at meetings and presentations, engage your audience even more when making presentations. Stories and metaphors are effective because our automatic response process, that is, our unconscious mind, is like that of a young child. Those of us who have been around young children know how engaged they are when you tell them stories, as it allows their mind to create a story inside their own head. Many people can remember fairy tales and those stories their grandparents told them when they were young, yet they might not be able to remember much about what happened at a meeting a few weeks ago. Here are some examples of how you can use metaphors. Telling a story or giving an example of how you overcame a challenge that is similar to the one that is being faced by the person you are speaking to. For example, a client, colleague, supplier. Telling a story about how someone else overcame the challenge. This is sometimes more effective than telling a story about yourself because it is more detached from the situation. The story could be about someone you know, such as another client, or a well-known situation in the public arena, or it can be a fable. Telling a story about how another client used your services as a way to overcome sales objections. You will have noticed that I use examples and stories in this audiobook to illustrate the points I am making. Tip 7.3. Pay attention to speakers whom you find engaging, and notice how they use stories to explain their ideas. Practice the use of relevant stories when at relatively unimportant meetings, and notice the impact on the listeners. Once you feel comfortable with using stories, then, if appropriate, use them at more important meetings.